Our second scripture lesson for today comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. It goes like this. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Please pray with me. Dear God, these words of yours fill our hearts. They comfort us where we are. Help us to apply them to our lives. Amen. I remember a Sunday school curriculum on the Beatitudes that I saw once. Instead of spelling Beatitudes, B-E-A-T-I-T-U-D-E, this curriculum spelled it B-E-E-attitude. Yes, there were a bunch of smiling bee characters, all printed out in color, full color, black and yellow bees on cardstock, and each bee was holding a sign that had one of these bee attitudes printed on it. There was a shy-looking bee holding up a sign that said, "Meekness." And there was a gentle but strong-looking bee holding up a sign that said, "Peacemaker." And there was a sad bee who had a teardrop coming out of the corner of her eye. There was also poor in spirit and merciful and doing right bees. This Sunday school curriculum assumed that the Beatitudes found here in Matthew were just another checklist of things that all Christians should do and be. According to this way of thinking, we're all supposed to be peacemakers, meek and gentle. And apparently we're all supposed to be all grieving as well. But you see, this list from Matthew was never meant to be a checklist of things that Christians should do. These are not commands to, "Hey you, be more meek," or "Hey, be sadder." Rather, these are common states of being. These are the mental and the emotional places where we humans often find ourselves, just while living our usual lives. Now, this way of speaking was part of the Hebrew culture and can be found in the book of Psalms and Isaiah and Jeremiah. And while sometimes translated into English as happy or fortunate, the word that starts each one of these sayings is the word blessed. And the most common things that they spoke of in the Old Testament using this word were the good things that we would all enjoy. But Jesus is using this format, this Hebrew format, in a very different way. What Jesus was doing was describing common human experiences and then reframing them in a way that we can think about things differently. In a way so we can think about it in light of following Christ. Jesus was talking about both the present and the future promise in every one of these Beatitudes. But what do they mean for us that are sitting here? What do they mean for us today? Now, the first beatitude is poor in spirit. And many commentators will go into a big discourse here about money, and they'll talk about hoarding up riches and, billions of dollars will never buy you into heaven. But this beatitude is not talking about money at all. Poor in spirit is talking about when we finally figure out that no matter how hard we try, that we are limited human beings. We're not capable of saving ourselves. Poor in spirit is about when we give up trying to impress God with all of our wonderful intellect and all of our gifts, and when we say, okay, God, that's it. I'm nothing but a pile of dirt. I cannot do this on my own. Everything that I try comes up short. Poor in spirit is about when we give up and we give our lives over to God. We are blessed when we stop trying to get into heaven on our own merits. When we simply allow God to give that to us undeservedly. This beatitude is about salvation through trusting in Jesus. Jesus as our Savior from our own brokenness. It's about thinking less of yourself to make room in your heart for God to grow and thrive in your life. Now, the second beatitude is about mourning and grieving. And it's not just personal grief that is being included here, from, say, the loss of a child or a parent, a relative or a friend. It could be grief for a country, grief for a people, grief for a town. Now, there are many people here who remember, how many of you remember when Detroit was a thriving metropolis? Look at those hands going up. When the car industry was giving it wealth and power and stature. But the fall of Detroit and the dysfunction that took it into bankruptcy is a very sad thing to see. Buildings that used to be well cared for are now boarded up and closed. Some houses were simply abandoned and left with broken windows staring out like blind eyes. But even sadder than Detroit are cities around the world that have been bombed. Stores where neighbors used to shop together that are now just piles of rubble. And schools and playgrounds that have been destroyed, so children now climb up on slabs of cement in sections of roofs instead of climbing up playgrounds. This is the kind of grief where even the memories of the happier times can get dim in the light of the current horrific destruction. But it is when we are in mourning, when we are sad, that we are blessed to be able to turn to God for comfort. It is also a promise that at the end of our time on earth, we all will be eternally comforted in the presence of Jesus. This second beatitude is the one that gets people through the hell of war and human oppression and life-jarring grief, all by learning to lean on God. Now the third one, what does it mean to be meek? At the time of the book of Matthew was written, the Romans were the unrivaled experts at human oppression. Their legions of soldiers took over everything with a might makes right attitude. But Jesus here was offering an opposite perspective. Jesus said it was the meek, the non-violent pacifists, that ultimately would prevail and inherit the earth. In a big way, he was right. The brave men who were soldiers were very likely to die on foreign soil, and many of them would never, ever live to come back home again. If you wanted to live long enough to inherit property from your father, it would be wise for you to pick a meeker and less combative occupation. Jesus here is also making a reference to his own peaceable kingdom on earth, his ultimate reign over everything. Now, the fourth beatitude is about priorities. If our purpose in this world is to simply to eat and drink and be merry, My friends, it is ultimately likely that we will run out of money to live our lives so lavishly. But if our purpose in our life is to do the right thing, my friends, we will never run out of the opportunities to do that. While there may be times of drought and famine, there will never be an end to the satisfaction that we receive to being kind to our neighbor as well as kind to ourselves. Now, this kindness to our neighbor also extends to the next beatitude. If we are merciful people, forgiving the wrongs that they have done to us, our neighbors will become more tolerant to us as well. This is something that is true of any group of people living in close contact with each other. The mercy and the forgiveness that we show to others is the same sort of mercy that God ultimately gives to each of us. Think of a neighborhood where folks pull in forgotten trash cans for each other. A place where neighbors keep their eyes out for the other person's children. This is the kind of caring, the kind of mercy, giving each other slack that Jesus was talking about. Now, the sixth beatitude also has a double meaning. First, if we are sincere and pure in our intentions to follow God, we will see God in heaven. This is the future promise that we have been shown throughout the Beatitudes. But it is also an indication of how we are living here on earth today. If we are right with God and others, we can see the image of God in all of our neighbors. Blacks, whites, brown people are all made in the image of God. Muslims, Buddhists, Soviets, Native Americans all carry that same capacity for love and care for others that comes from being made in the image of God. Even, yes, Democrats and Republicans can both be the hands and feet of God to other people. But it is so easy for us to be blinded to our own prejudices so that we cannot see the face of God in others. We attribute to others the worst of intentions rather than the best of intentions. And we allow our differences to become insurmountable. And we allow compromise to never become an option. Now, a compromise in being able to negotiate and mediate between people with differences that seem to be insurmountable, brings us to the seventh beatitude, that of being a peacemaker. There are often many ways to compromise, and it is our pride and our stubbornness that causes us to stand our ground and to not budge an inch for anyone. But the work of peacemaking begins when we honestly and truly try to see things from another person's perspective. When we try to walk a mile in their shoes. When we have empathy for the plight of the other. A good peacemaker is willing to negotiate so that nobody gets everything that they want, but so that everyone has enough to get by on. Now, the last beatitude is the one that always gives me the most hope. When people are unfair and unkind, when they purposely misrepresent who you are and what you stand for, it is then that we all should have hope. When we are segregated, tortured, stepped on for our faith, that is when we can know that we are actually making a difference. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is an excellent example of someone who stood up for the oppressed and who was persecuted for what he said and for what he did. As he and others participated in civil rights marches and protests, as they demanded equal rights and equal access for people who happened to be born with darker skin, his name, his family, his church, they were all threatened and persecuted. They lived for constant fear of their lives, right here in the United States of America. But the thing that gave Dr. King the most hope, the most comfort, was his assurance that he was a child of God. He knew where his real and eternal home was. And as he was assassinated for living out his faith, for standing up against injustice in our United States, my friends, we too can be encouraged to speak up for the oppressed, to call out those comments that are offensive, and to be the peacemakers and the change makers in our world today. In conclusion, the Beatitudes are not just a simple checklist of things that we have to all try to do today. Instead, they are each ways that we can change our perspective, to put a different worldview on our states of being that are common to all of our daily lives. It's like a pair of glasses that changes the way that we see things. These words from Jesus are clues on how we, as followers of Christ, can be blessedly happy. It doesn't matter how bad things get. It doesn't matter if we are in mourning. We can have the comfort of Christ to support us. If our hearts are right and focused on God, we will be able to see the image of the face of Jesus in others. And if we are being persecuted for our faith, for standing up against voices of oppression, we can be assured that we are in very good company. May these words give each of us great comfort for both today and for eternity. May they give us hope and strength for facing all of the things, for good or for ill, that will happen to us in 2020. Amen.